What a great garden space. Thanks for sharing it with us. Right now, we're going to be turning our attention to the do's and don'ts of gravel in the yard. We've all seen them, those yards where they've taken out everything but gravel. What's wrong with that? Well, we're going to learn a lot about what's wrong with that and some right ways to use gravel right now with Elizabeth McGreevy, who's with Droplet Land Designs. She's an ecologist and is very concerned about this phenomenon we see in our city. What's driving that? Who's driving that?
It's coming from several different fronts. You know, for one, you have architects that want to have a very clean, streamlined, open, landscape design that's simple, that doesn't, block the view of the architecture.
Right.
You also have house flippers who are on a tight, timeline, and so they're looking for something that's really quick and easy. And then you have landscape companies.
Quick and easy for them, we should say.
Well, yes, and it has the tendency to hide some flaws also. Then you have landscape companies that, are talking people into replacing the mulch.
Right.
Because it gives them a little bit of extra return. And then you have the everyday homeowner who has tells me that they're tired of fighting, trying to keep that lawn alive. And so to them, they're being approached by companies that say, hey, you can just switch out and do the gravel. And it's a lot easier.
Right.
And they say that it conserves water, that it's a green alternative.
Yeah, well, there are some alternative truths to that.
Exactly.
And we're going to dive in and talk about that. But one of the things that I really want to focus in early, make sure we deal with this, is that in almost all the cases where you see people putting down these vast swaths of gravel, taking out their lawns, taking out garden beds, etc., the first thing they do when they are doing this installation is they put down landscape fabric. This is allegedly to help with weeds, but this is a real problem for the environment, isn't it?
Yeah, and to be promoted as a green alternative, if you're then laying down a petroleum-based product, right there, that makes it not a green alternative.
Right.
But the biggest problem, people put it down because they want to suppress the weeds, they want to keep the gravel from sinking into the soil, and I get that, but at the same time, you're killing off all the life in the soil. The earthworms, when it rains, they have nowhere to go. They either die or they vacate the area. The result is there's no nutrient cycling, the oxygen can no longer get in there.
Right.
You have to understand is that landscape fabric was invented for the agricultural industry as a temporary cover to keep moisture and weeds out for like strawberry farmers.
Right.
It was temporary though, and at the end of the season you roll it up. But now people are using it permanent, and they're putting stuff on top of it, which can also build up a crust, a silt between the fabric and the rocks. And all of this increases runoff, reduces water infiltrating into the ground to recharge our groundwater.
And what water does infiltrate drowns a lot of the organisms that are in there because they can't escape.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So a very nasty situation.
Yes.
There are some other drawbacks to the alleged green factor here. One is just the utility cost. We live in a heat island. That's what cities are known as.
Yes.
And if you surround your house with heat collecting gravel, what are you going to expect in terms of your utility bills?
The City of Austin is already finding that there's as much of a 30% increase in electric bills for homes that have more gravel. And that's because, like you said, is that the gravel is a thermal mass. And where plants transpire, and that is nature's way of cooling the air, because the water that they use is coming from deep down where it's cooled off.
Right.
And the gravel, it just reflects the heat.
Right.
Heat just bounces off, and it goes into the night, makes the nights hotter also.
Well, there's also the problem of runoff, right?
Yes, and that has to do with the compacting of the soil because you've killed it with the landscape fabric, but also with that silting on top that plugs the holes in the fabric, and so you get more runoff. So
a host really of environmental problems, and And that freedom and ease that people are expecting doesn't really come either, does it?
No, it's definitely not no maintenance. A lot of people have told me, yes, we thought it was going to be no maintenance. And of course, this is planet Earth, not the moon. And so we do have plants growing, and they will find any way possible to get a foothold.
Right.
And so people are either vacuuming.
Right.
They're basically doing, it's like, oh, their living room is now their front yard, or they're blowing it. I have a neighbor down the street, blows it once a week because he has the smaller gravel. If you had bigger rocks, you can go a little bit longer, but you still have to get in there, blow it. The people who
and you blow it and do this kind of thing because if leaves get in there, any kind of organic matter,
it starts to build up that silt.
Right, and then the weeds can then appear.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, if you don't keep on top of it, which a lot of people don't, they end up dousing the area with chemicals, and again, not a green alternative in the end. And then whenever you decide to change it out. It's a nightmare to get rid of because it will start to shred apart, and trying to change it out for new fabric is a nightmare.
Yeah, right. So we're painting a pretty bleak scenario here, but there are appropriate uses for gravel too, and appropriate ways to put it down, correct?
Exactly. First of all, I never use landscape fabric in my designs. Never. You don't. I'll, for instance, cut, excavate down, and remove the seeds, and come back in with compacted road base. So alkaline, most weeds don't like that.
Right.
And then when weeds do come up, it's easier, not tearing it through the fabric.
Right.
And then you put a little bit of gravel on top of that, so when it rains, there's no crust building up, so it continues to recharge the ground. I use it for, walkways, patios, little spaces where you get out of your car, along the curb, Of course, I use rocks in drainage ways. There's definitely ways to use it. What we're talking about is not using the fabric, but also the overuse of it where it's all you see, where it's dominated by gravel, not plants.
Right. So balance is a good thing. I mean,
Exactly.
Gravel makes for great patio spaces.
Exactly.
Makes for great walkways.
And it's better than just solid concrete.
Absolutely. And it could be beautiful and attractive if you choose an appropriate material.
Yes.
But do it. First off, knowing what you're going to get into, and do it appropriately and not everywhere, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and besides just having the gravel, for people who are having problems with their lawns, there's better ways to maintain a lawn.
Sure.
My neighbor across the street, we had clay soils, he has full sun, and he uses zoysia grass. He never irrigates, never fertilizes, and he mows it maybe every 3 weeks. You get the right lawn, right place. Same thing with right plant, right place.
Right. Now, a lot of people are also turning to these under trees, and I'm thinking, what's that doing to the trees? Where are they going to get their nutrients and their water?
Way long ago when I worked at the Natural Gardener, one of the first things John Dromgold told me is don't ever put lawn underneath a tree. Trees and lawns don't mix. And most people, they end up finding out because it's so hard to get lawn to grow under trees, the roots, everything.
Yeah, right.
Stop fighting it. Is instead replace it with sedges.
Or horse herb.
Or horse herb, or even silver ponyfoot if it's not real shady. But sedges naturally grow underneath trees.
Right.
And then that way you can still get kind of a lawn effect, but without all the hassle. And then another option is just to let your leaves fall. I do that. I just leave the leaves.
It's free mulch.
It's free mulch. It's easy. I just sweep everything underneath the trees, and they're happy as could be.
Right. That's one time I was breaking up twigs and throwing leaves into a bed, and my neighbor's like, "You're just going to have to rake those out, aren't you?" And I'm like, "No." That's exactly the opposite of what I'm doing here. So these are all really great tips, and I think they're really important here. What's the one lesson you most want people to take away from this conversation, though? If you had to kind of instill something in their minds about the do's and don'ts of gravel, what would it be?
We need to stop treating our yards like our living rooms. They're not static environments. When you're out there in the yard, that's part of nature, and we need to start figuring out how to work with the ecological system that it is, instead of trying to cover it up.
Right.
and kill it. We need to try to make all of our yards be more ecologically productive, which also means sinking more water into the ground to reduce flooding and sustaining us through droughts.
Well said. Thank you so much for being our guest today, Elizabeth. You've done a great job. You are an evangelist, and I appreciate that very much. You have a good cause.
You're welcome.
All right, and coming up next is our friend Daphne.